So we're going to start looking at some different operations and dealing with fractions today, looking at specifically just adding and subtracting them. Before we get into that, we got to look at it and say what exactly is a fraction. So we have this fraction here, a over b. A is the numerator. And b is the denominator. So a over b is telling us that it's a divided by b. So that's just a brief overview of what a fraction is. A divided by b, a is the numerator, b is the denominator. When we talk about adding and subtracting them, we have these steps to follow. The first one is to make sure we have a common denominator. If you do, it's easy, move to step 2. If you don't, you find an equivalent fraction to have a common denominator. We'll talk about what that looks like in a second. Second step is to add or subtract, depending on the problem, the numerators. Third step is to keep the denominators the same. So I add the numerators, subtract the numerators, whatever the problem says, keep the denominator the same, and then I simplify if needed. So let's look at a couple examples. This first one is 2/5 plus 1/5. So I don't know, what does this equal? So step 1 is make sure you have a common denominator. So I do, in the fact that these are both 5. So we're good there. So second step, add or subtract the numerators. In this case, I am adding. So I'm going to do 2 plus 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. Step 3 is to keep the denominator the same, so do 3 over 5. Step 4 is to simplify if needed. In this case, there's nothing that goes into both 3 and 5 to reduce that any further, so it's simplified. This is my final answer. Second one I look at and I say, okay, 5/8 minus 2/8. So step 1 is to make sure you have a common denominator. Again, I have 2/8, so I'm all set there. Second step is to add or subtract the numerators. I'm subtracting in this case, so 5 minus 2 is 3. Keep the denominators the same, so 3 over 8. In this case, again, there's nothing that goes into both 3 and 8 to divide evenly, so this is my final answer. So these two examples is where I get into where I don't have a common denominator. So I have 5/7 plus 3 over 14. 7 and 14 are obviously not the same number, so I need to ask myself, how do I get common denominators? How do I find that equivalent fraction? First thing I usually do is to look and say, okay, does the smaller denominator go into the bigger denominator? Can I divide it evenly into the bigger denominator? So in this case, is 14 divided by 7 an even number? Well, if I do that, 14 divided by 7 is 2, and so that works. So to find the equivalent fraction, I'm going to multiply this 5/7 by 2 over 2. I'm basically going to multiply by 2 over 2 is essentially 1, because 2 divided by 2 is 1, so I can do that. And then I can rewrite this problem as 2 times 5 is 10, 10 over 14 plus 3 over 14 stays the same. So then now I have common denominators, so I go to step 2, add the numerators, so I get 13 over 14, and then again I can't simplify because that does not go into 13 and 14 don't have anything that goes into it commonly. So last example here is 3 minus 2/5. Now anytime you see a whole number, I can write this as a fraction over 1. Remember we talked about that division, so 3 divided by 1 is 3, so it works. It stays the same thing. So I have a denominator of 1 and a denominator of 5. When you have a denominator of 1, it gets pretty easy because I can just multiply this one by 5 over 5, because that changes my denominators but gives me an equivalent fraction. So this becomes 15 over 5 minus 2 over 5. So 15 minus 2 is equal to 13. And 13 over 5. This one I could simplify. So I want to know how many times does this 13 go into 5, or 5 go into 13. So it goes in 2 times, which means I've used 10 up here because 5 times 2 is 10, it's gone 10. So what's left is 3/5. If you want to, if it's a improper fraction like this where the numerator is bigger than the denominator, I don't care if you leave it as an improper fraction. That's okay with me.